everyone. Thank you for joining us. My name is Laura Woodward Cavers. I'm the Reader Advisor here at New Canaan Library. Tonight's program, Loving Your Body, Seeking Wellness by Putting Plants First, is based on the book Plants First, A Physician's Guide to Wellness Through a Plant-Forward Diet by Dr. Katie Takayasu, also known as simply Dr. Katie. Dr. Katie Takayasu is an integrative medicine doctor with a passion for plant-rich cooking and finding balance in lifestyle rhythms. She combines traditional Western medicine with complementary modalities like acupuncture, mind-body medicine, botanicals, and nutrition to help patients holistically achieve their goals. She is an assistant professor of clinical medicine at Columbia University, New York Presbyterian, and is teaching the next generation of doctors about healing the whole patient. Also with us tonight is Dr. Jennifer Morgan. She is a doctor of physical therapy who specializes in treating pelvic health conditions. Her goal is to always have her patients feeling educated and empowered, and her plans of care blend hands-on techniques, yoga training, movement, and breath work to improve range of motion, gaining strength, decreasing pain, and regulating the nervous system to facilitate your body's healing. She is the owner of Centrality Physical Therapy and Wellness, located in New Canaan, Connecticut. Welcome you both for being here with us tonight.
Oh, thank you so much. Thanks for having both of us. And Jen, it's really nice to see you across the airwaves as well. Laura, thank you so much.
There has been a lot of excitement about this event tonight. So I know that there's a lot of people wanting to know about integrative medicine. Before you begin your program, for people to know, I will be going off screen and Dr. Katie and Dr. Jennifer Morgan will carry on a conversation about integrative medicine and about the book. But before that, I'd just like to ask the two of you some questions. Dr. Morgan, how did you learn of Dr. Takayasu's integrative medicine approach? Is integrative medicine something you learned in med school?
So I was lucky enough to meet Dr. Katie as a patient. So Dr. Katie actually was recommended to me by a friend because I had some gut, issues that were truthfully just not healing themselves. I figured if I ignored it, maybe it would just go away, and that wasn't working, go figure. And I was so lucky enough to land in Dr. Katie's healing hands. And I mean, she totally changed the way that my body functions and the way that I look at the way that my body is able to heal. And from that experience, we have become close friends, and I'm thrilled. I'm so grateful for her, and I'm happy to be here to support her and her amazing book.
Dr. Takayasu, what steered you to become a medical doctor of integrative medicine? Was there something you experienced that pulled you in that direction?
Oh, I really love this question, and thanks so much, Jen, for that shout out. You know, when I was in residency, I did a family medicine residency at Columbia that was 3 years long, and I kind of managed through the first year, intern year, and then the second year, I just started noticing that I just didn't feel very well much of the time. I was just really chronically stressed, wasn't sleeping enough, was eating way too much hospital food, and just kind of really a shell of my former self. And I went to see my primary care doctor, who I love. And one of the things he did for me was he validated my feelings, that my experience was real. And that made me feel, inherently very welcome to share what was going on. And because I also wanted to become pregnant and wasn't having regular periods, he suggested I see his wife's acupuncturist. And I had never considered acupuncture ever before, but I thought, what the heck, whatever, I'm, game to try something new. And I literally fell in love with the modality. I remember so succinctly being on the table and having this moment oh my goodness, I have got to help other people experience this in their lives. And so that's when I really discovered what integrative medicine was. And so I stopped eating hospital food and I started packing my lunch. And on the days that I wasn't working overnights or big days, I was trying to get to the gym or try to get outside for a quick walk. I started doing yoga instead of like really hardcore workouts at the gym. And I really prioritize sleep pretty much above everything else, which is hard when you're a young, fun person. And all at once, I noticed that I started to feel better. And ultimately then was able to get pregnant with my twins and make it through residency and do that like in a little bit better shape of myself. So I came to integrative medicine as I think do most practitioners. We come to the place that we end up practicing because we have some kind of transformational experience ourselves that compels us to practice the way that we practice. And I feel so moved to provide this kind of medicine to people because I had such a powerful personal experience. And I talk about that actually quite a bit in the book at the start, because I want people to understand that I too am human. And I too, like, you know, had things going wrong in my body that I was, just as Jen said, like trying to ignore, but they just generally don't go away that way.
Well, what a great twosome. Here you two are going to be talking about this great book. You both were patients of this kind of approach, and that's great. So I'm going to go off screen and you guys just go ahead and start talking about this absolutely beautiful book. I wish I had a copy to show you all, but it's all checked out of the library, so I can't show you, but it's gorgeous. It's a gorgeous book. Anyway, I will leave you both. I'll come back toward the end to then read questions. Have a very good question and answer.
All right, Jen, what you got? Let's go.
I think the question in everyone's mind, at least in my mind, is where did the intention for this book come from, right? What was the driver that made you sit down and you're like, I want to write this book?
You know, that's a great question. I think I've wanted to write a book for a long time. I feel like I have and continue to have something important to say, as do many people that I hang out with. But it really was the impetus of someone contacting me from the publishing world and saying like, hey, we've seen you on social media. We think you've got something really cool to say. What would you say about writing a book that prioritizes a plant-forward diet? And I was really excited about that idea of like really putting out there what I really believe to be true after this many years in practice, and also what I have found to be true in my own life. But it was really important to me not to write a book just about living a plant-forward life, because as you know, even with digestive issues, it's not just about the food that you put in your body. It's like everything else, because health really is absolutely everything. So I asked the publishers, like, hey, would you guys mind if I put some stuff in there about sleep and meditation and about exercise? And they were really into that. So they really allowed me to be very full spectrum in the way that I approach health. And that was really exciting. But I think the other help, honestly, was that I wrote this during the pandemic. I started writing in like October, November of 2020. And then I finished in the spring of 2021. And so we weren't really doing that much stuff. And so it was kind of nice to have something really exciting, because I would get so excited to write. It was just nice to have something to look forward to. And so I had my cozy little writing corner in the house up in the attic, and would just go up there and kind of just pump out all the stuff. And honestly, most of it just like sort of came. Like that's just kind of the way that inspiration works for me.
I love that. And it's also nice that this beautiful book, and if you have not seen the book truly is beautiful, came out of this time where a lot of people felt lost, and a lot of people kind of fell off the bandwagon of like living their quote unquote normal life. And we had to all reassess, right? Out of COVID, a lot of pivots have happened, and we've all had to kind of shift our mindset. And I'm not sure if everybody knows. Can you kind of dive a little bit more into like what a plant forward, lifestyle or diet is? Because that, people know meditation and yoga, but they may not know that mentality or that focus.
Yeah, and I think you bring up a really great point, which is that I really love a plant forward diet, not a plant only diet and not a plant-based diet. So, I'm always happy to hang out with people who are vegan or plant-based, but I myself am plant forward, which means that I put a really strong emphasis on plants on my plate. And I come to this place of kind of like the 80-20 rule in life, which basically means that 80% of what we're putting in our bodies needs to be really amazing. And then you don't have to worry so much about the 20. And some of us are sensitive little bears and we need to be more like 90-10 or 85-15. But for the most of us, 80-20 kind of works. And so in that 20% is, you know, a little bit of sugar every now and then, a little bit of processed foods. You can't get away from it all the time. But in that 20% is also some of the not so helpful animal stuff, your burgers, you know, animal proteins that don't really serve us. But there are a couple really great animal proteins that are really good for us. So something like wild Alaskan salmon is a beautiful thing. And that would have to be, in my mind, in a really anti-inflammatory plant-forward diet. So what I try to do is I try to take my plate every day, every meal, and I try to divide it in half. And on half of that plate, I put all of my like bitter greens and like all the sort of like not sweet vegetables. And then I take the other half and I divide it into thirds. And a third is some kind of protein, either from a plant or an animal, usually plants. And then a third of it goes to a healthy fat. So something like olive oil or avocados, nuts and seeds, that kind of stuff. And then the other third goes to either starchy vegetable, like a sweet, inherently sweet vegetable, or a whole grain. And that's how I kind of try to find balance on the plate. And what really Plants First really tries to do is not only give you like the information, like the science information as to why one should do this, but also like the very practical, sustainable steps that you should take, you know, in your life to make that actually come to fruition, which is, I mean, it's the hard part. We all know this stuff is good for us, but how do we actually do it in real life? That's the question.
Oh, you make such a good point. Actionable items, right? That's like a hot topic term in my clinic. We talk about actionable items, and your book, and it sounds to me like even talking to you now, it's all about making things bite-sized, digestible, and actionable, right? So you're able to start implementing them the minute you read the page. You can take it off and you can implement it, right? So,
oh, absolutely.
do you find that this plant-forward thinking, this plant-forward lifestyle benefits everyone, most of the people that you come in contact with? Like, talk to me a little bit about that, because I'm sure there are some people out there being like, I don't know if this is right for me.
Well, you know, the thing is, I think you bring up a great point, which is like, not everything is good for everybody. So we all have our own internal sense of feels good in our body. I call that your wellness intuition. It's just like what you inherently know to be good for your body. You need 9 hours of sleep. You need to meditate before bed. You can't stay up too late working on a project or you'll stay up all night. Whatever the sort of situation is, right? You know these things about your body. And likewise with food, you may know that like, it doesn't matter how much like you love broccoli. Every time you eat it, it really does not feel good in your body. So maybe broccoli is not the best thing for you, even though it may be great for 99.9% of people. And so take into account like what you know to be true about your body. But the next thing that I would say is that most people can do pretty well on a plant-forward diet because there is like that little wiggle room. But the problem for many of us is because of the way that we're eating, our microbiome, so like the good little probiotics that live in our gut, are accustomed to the way that we're eating. So if you're eating a, like say a paleo diet or a keto diet, your microbiome situation is sort of tailored to that because that's what you're feeding on a daily basis. So if you wanted to go from something like keto to a plant-forward diet and you went like all or nothing, like overnight, you'd probably end up really bloated, really like not feeling great, and probably wouldn't like yourself very much. And so what you have to do is kind of make these slow and steady changes so that the body has time to equilibrate little by little over the course of time. And then maybe use some, you know, use some proper supplements along the way to kind of help yourself. But most people, like the majority of people, can do very well with a plant-forward way of eating, understanding that some of us just need more fat. Some of us just need more protein. Some of us need fewer carbs, you know, even fewer good carbs. And so trying to figure out like where you are on that spectrum is super important.
No, it's so interesting. And for me, right, so I grew up in Chicago. So like my mind is like meat, potatoes, right? My little Midwestern brain. And so when you and I first got together, and this was pre-book, right? And these were the concepts that you introduced to me and I took home to my husband. And I mean, truly, it was really hard for me to wrap my brain around plant-based protein, right? Like, so, you know, just for the people who maybe are like me, my Midwest mindset, what are some of like your favorite like protein dense plants that you really go to? Like, what are your go-tos?
Yeah, so one of the things that you have to understand about plants, like first and foremost, is that animal proteins are complete proteins, in that they have all the essential amino acids. So we can make about half of the amino acids that we need, the building blocks of protein, and the other half we actually have to get from food. When you eat a steak, like you're getting naturally all of those amino acids. So if you are eating more plant forward proteins, you do have to sort of be cognizant of the fact that like you have to eat a wide breadth of them, and you can't just eat beans, say, because you won't get all the essential amino acids that you need to like really function. And that's why some people who follow like a plant only diet can run into issues with, deficiencies in certain vitamins or in amino acids, or be a little protein shy. And I'm sure you've met and had friends in college who were vegan and like all they did was like eat carbs, because carbohydrates, because they have fiber in them, don't have animal stuff in them. But anyways, going back to the plant proteins, my favorite call outs, if you're thinking about complete proteins, interestingly, are things like whole organic soy. And so many people are scared to eat soy because we read how bad it is for breast cancer, and everybody thinks it's going to give them like, man boobs and all sorts of problems. But the truth is, I know, right? But the truth is, if you eat a modest amount of whole organic soy, so not from a genetically modified source, but organic, and you eat something like tofu, tempeh, or edamame, you get all the proteins that you need. It's very, very dense, almost as dense as like eating chicken as far as protein ounce per ounce. And actually, if you know how to cook it, it tastes pretty good. But that wasn't something that I grew up in the Midwest like knowing about. That was something I learned, after the fact, and actually learned from my mother-in-law, who's a really, really great Japanese cook. So that's one, whole organic soy. Another really good source of plant proteins would be things like from the lentil or the legume pulse family. So all of your different beans, not just black beans or kidney beans, but like literally look up and down when you go to the store and see all the different beans that exist. Go to the bulk aisle and like really look at like all the different ones that are out there. There's tons of different beans, and there's tons of different types of lentils too. So all of those count as well. And then other sources of protein that are really good, and I rely on a lot, are things like hemp seeds and chia seeds, other nuts and seeds, so sunflower seeds, as well as pumpkin seeds, and then any variety of nut. I keep lots of different nuts in my pantry because I like the way that all of them taste sort of in different ways and in different, amounts. And so I kind of like eat from all those different things, on a weekly basis. And then I put in, because girl, I'm from the Midwest too, I put in like the animal proteins also, because I really love a good steak. Like it tastes really good to me. And every once in a while, I just really want that. And so I don't deprive myself really of anything. There's really no food that's off limits in my household, or, even in my personal life.
That's wonderful. That really is. And I think my favorite takeaway from your book is that it is so much science and digestible information, but there's also a ton of recipes. There's just a ton of content. So if you're sitting here, like, I don't even know where I would start, like where I would even find the type of recipes that Dr. Katie's talking about. Dr. Katie, there's so many, right? And how did you come up with all of those recipes? Truthfully, they're beautiful. They taste delicious. And I can't even begin to imagine how long it took you to come up with those.
Yeah, when the publisher really, sort of talked the nitty gritty about what they wanted in a book, and they're like, not only do we want like a really digestible, sort of download of like a doctor brain on a plant forward diet, we'd also, because this is what I do, I connect in the kitchen, they're like, we'd also like you to develop about 40 recipes. And I was like, oh, okay, yeah, no problem, I got this. And then I started, yeah, whatever, I got this. But then I started like really cataloging it out, and I was like, oh, like it's a lot of work. And to be honest, it is so much harder to write recipes than it is to write about like blood sugar roller coaster. Like it's just, I can't believe the detail that goes into recipe writing, because it's so procedural, and like everybody's sort of take on it is so sort of different. And I so remember the recipe editor coming back to me with a recipe and saying, did you use a skillet or a saute pan? And I'm like, I don't even know what the difference is. This is what my pan looks like. What is it even called? Because I'm not a chef. But what I found is that for me, being in the kitchen is like creative expression. It's kind of like where I sort of find my chill time. And so whenever I would have a time in the book when I'd be writing and I was just like, oh, I just like had enough. I don't know what else I want to say. I would have to make dinner for my family. And so I would go downstairs and I would sort of just create random things with literally ingredients that were in my refrigerator and my pantry. And if it got pretty good reviews from the 3 boys that I live with, then I was like, huh, this must be a pretty good one. So then I'd send it to like an auntie or a friend or someone, and they would try it, give me a little bit of feedback. And then little by little, all the different recipes sort of just took shape. But it was a really fun process. And I honestly think it's probably what saved me from like, just being a bit bored of the project, because it was that space for creativity. But recipe writing is not for the faint of heart. And I always said during the book writing process, whenever I got really, really like sort of down, I'd be like, I'm a doctor, not a writer. I'm a doctor, not a writer. And now I also say I'm a doctor, not a chef. Even though I wear these different hats in my life, like I still don't profess to be, to be perfect at it. But it was a lot of fun.
That's fantastic. And so how do you help individuals who have allergies, right? So I think of my husband who has he's like very gluten sensitive. He's also like a little bit sensitive to like beans and a little nuts. And so like, what would that look like for someone who has like a lot of sensitivities or allergies?
Oh yeah, that's a great question. Well, one thing that's really nice about food and about plants in general is that there are lots of different options. So unless one is like really categorically completely allergic to sort of a whole sort of like mass of different things, like I do have patients who are, completely allergic to tree nuts. So that takes like a whole big group out of their diet. But there are such great alternatives. So if you couldn't have all of the tree nuts, well, most people can still have seeds. And seeds provide some of the similar sort of nutrition content, as well as the flavor and kind of the texture. So you can do some substitutions. I have had patients who are really sensitive to the bigger beans, like the gigantes or like chickpeas or any of the ones that are just like a little bit bigger, but they're less sensitive to things like lentils or to some of the smaller beans. I've also had patients who've had digestive sort of ups and downs that weren't really food allergies. I mean, they didn't have like a frank allergic reaction to them, but were just more sensitive. And some of that sensitivity can actually be because of, again, not having the right microbiome balance or other things kind of just being off in the body. And the body kind of just says at some point, like, you know what, I've had enough. Like, I'm going to give you a food sensitivity to broccoli. And it sort of just throws broccoli like under the bus. And they're sort of figuring out how to tease around that, heal the body so that it can tolerate more foods. That's kind of the work that I tend to do privately with patients, because it's important. And if you're, someone who can't eat any cruciferous vegetables, which would be like your broccoli, cauliflower, Brussels sprouts kind of stuff, because it causes you like massive digestive issues, then it would be a sign to me that you would probably need to talk to your doctor or someone who knows about this kind of stuff, because like that's a whole massive food that you should be eating. And we want to heal the body so that you could actually tolerate that stuff. So you can use sensitivities both as like a warning of like, hey, something's not quite right, but also like this opportunity to change and improve the body's health so that you can actually, tolerate those things.
Sure. And would you recommend that individuals find someone like yourself, someone who, specializes in integrative health and holistic medicine before starting a plant-forward diet? Or is it something that they could start, see how it goes, and then potentially have to find someone on the back end? Like, what do you recommend?
Well, I think you could go either way. I think if you're pretty adventurous and you kind of just dive, feet first into things, that's kind of how I do things. And I would say like, just go for it. But everybody asks me like, well, who needs an integrative medicine doctor? And integrative medicine, I think, is really suitable for people who have everything from, I just had a heart attack and I want to figure out like what I need to eat, to people who have digestive woes, to people who are working with like ups and downs of perimenopause or other sort of hormonal issues, to new moms, to people who are postpartum. I mean, literally anybody, man or woman, young and old, could have need for an integrated medicine doctor. And there are many more of us now than there have been before. And so I think finding someone that you trust, that you connect with, is really important, because you do need a guide. You know, I mean, I'm sure you see the same thing in your physical therapy practice too. It's like, you can give someone the exercises, they could watch that on YouTube, right? But like actually sort of figuring out, how does this pertain to my particular problem? Sometimes you like need a guide to figure that out.
Sure. And it should be individualized, right? So that's also another important topic, that sometimes it does have to be individualized for the person in front of you, their why, their root cause, their intention, right? So it's important that we're treating the human in front of us, not just, just some person, right? And you and I collaborate often. And so it's something I know that you and I both really, truly value, which is why I recommend you all the time. I feel like it's a Dr. Katie party, because you're just so fantastic. Now,
Thanks.
not all, integrative med docs are trained the same, I'm sure. So, how do we know, the right fit, I guess, right? How do we know the right fit?
Yeah, I mean, that's a good question. I think trying to figure out like what you're really going for, or like what you really are missing in your health, is probably the step in the right direction. Some of us are very data driven, and we like lots and lots and lots of data. That's the kind of person who might seek like a functional medicine doctor. If you have more, women's health issues, you might look for a gynecologist who does integrative medicine. If you're looking for someone to do like the whole body, that'd be something more like me, like someone who's trained in family medicine, who knows like a little bit about a lot of things and can kind of put it all together. But ultimately, I mean, I say this all the time when I'm talking about, people seeing therapists, which I always joke, like, the best money in life is like spent on psychotherapy, I think. I love my own therapist, and I think that most of us could benefit from objective opinions in our lives. But honestly, you have to give it a couple of times. So you have to really go see someone, give it like, 3 times or so to sort of know if you can make that connection. And then if it starts to feel right to you, like, trust your intuition, it probably is right for you. But if it doesn't feel right, then it probably is not. And not everybody's made, not everybody is everybody's cup of tea. And so it's okay to sort of say like, yeah, I tried this and it didn't work for me. But most people, I think, actually could either get, some opinions from an integrated medicine doctor, or could actually just start to live the lifestyle of like trying to prioritize plants, trying to be more mindful about good exercise, prioritizing sleep, and then paying attention to the spiritual self, which are, in my mind, like the 4 pillars of the way that I practice in integrated medicine in general.
Wonderful. And just like you touched on, you need a couple of sessions to figure out if your therapist would be right for you. How much time would you say one needs if they dive headfirst into this plant forward mindset? How long would it take for them to start seeing the benefits, and how do they start tracking? Like, what objective things should they start looking at?
Oh, it's a great question. I think that you could pay attention to literally anything happening in your body. You could pay attention to your energy, especially in the afternoon, like when we typically go through like an energy slump about, 60 to 90 minutes after we eat. You could pay attention to the way that you're sleeping at night. You could pay attention to your digestion. And if you're no longer like, passing really rancid gas, like that could be a total win for you. You could pay attention just to sort of your mood. A lot of people report that they're just like sort of nicer, more even keeled human beings, not only around like their menstrual cycles, but just in general, when they take care of themselves, and eat a better diet. So I think you could really pay attention to anything. And I think people notice, the difference within a couple of days in small ways. But I think the really consistent change from things like this, because, it's gentle medicine, you're probably looking at 3 months, 6 months, maybe even a year, depending on like where you're coming from in your health and like where you're really trying to go. But I would say pay attention to all the little details, and then you'll be sort of surprised. One of my favorite things to sort of figure out with patients is, I document, like if someone comes into my office and says, I have a headache, like I'm going to say, like, well, how many days a week do you have that headache? And like on a scale of 1 to 10, like how bad is it? And I'll write that information in their chart. And they'll come back like, a couple weeks, a month later, whenever they're coming back for their next visit. And I'll say, well, how are the headaches? And they're like, oh, well, not really having that many headaches anymore, but I hadn't really thought about it because we don't necessarily notice the absence of symptoms. We just notice like when the symptoms are there, but also like, yeah, right. Bingo. So like when the symptoms start to go away and you're like, oh, I've only had one headache in the last 2 weeks, like that's a total win, right? But you may not notice that because, you know, whoever sort of sits there and says like, hey, in this moment, I don't have any gas. My stomach feels really great. I don't have a headache. You know, we don't. We just live our lives, right? But you could pay attention to anything.
Oh, it's actually so funny. As you're sitting here talking, like, and listing off all these things, like, hey, I don't pay attention to my headaches. I'm sitting here like, gosh, I treat a lot of incontinence, right? So incontinence is really common. And one of those things is how we drink our water, right? So most of the time people are like, I need my 64 ounces or more. They chug a bunch and then they do nothing. And then they chug and then they do nothing. And they have leakage related to the chugs, right? And so I'm like, let's
Yes.
just space it out. Let's reframe. Let's go 6 ounces per hour and see how that goes. And then like they come back and they're like, hey, I'm not leaking. And I'm like, so I love how you're like, let's reframe, right? We know the goals and then let's start actually like documenting one thing at a time and notice these like tiny changes and they all start adding up, which is super cool.
Oh, I love that. But I'm also gonna I'm gonna use that not chugging my water because I'm kind of guilty of that too. We all do that, right? Where we're like, oh my God, it's 10 o'clock and I haven't drank anything today. And so then we chug it and then all at once. You know, if you're a lady who's had a baby, you know that you can't just drink a bunch of water. Like it's a whole situation. So the tiny little amounts and those tiny little consistent changes along the way, I think is the hallmark of real sustainable change. Because the body does not like drastic shifts. It just doesn't. It likes slow and steady changes. And when we give it those right inputs at the right time in the right spacing, then the body adjusts and it does really great.
Totally. I love that. I think that that's really important. And I think, as you're saying, this type of mindset can be stacked with other really great habits, right? So changing the way that you exercise and changing the way that you prioritize mindfulness or journaling or meditation. And that I really do feel goes underneath that integrative umbrella, that holistic umbrella that you work so readily in. Are you counseling people also about how to stay mindful and how to stay grateful and how to meditate and all of those types of things as well?
Oh, definitely. I mean, that's a part of like that big sort of construct of spirituality. You know, I always say to patients, like, you know, I don't care sort of like how you spend your spiritual time. If it's praying, if it's, you know, if it's meditating, if it's doing yoga, like I don't mind how you spend. I just mind that you do it. How you connect to that inner part of yourself, like the real self, like that you that lives like in your belly, that only you and like your close friends and family know. A lot of us sort of just like lose track of that person that used to live there because we get so busy with work and kids and, you know, demands from our parents and, you know, all the different things that kind of go on in our lives. But yeah, it's that connection back to the spiritual self that often is one of the most important components to really making the transition to feeling better. Because when we reassure our bodies that like, hey, I've got you, like I'm taking care of you in this way that allows you to rest and digest and to just kind of wind down from the hustle and bustle of each day, that's where the money is. And that's where you get that down regulation of the nervous system and anxiety and like just the things that kind of plague all of us. And I think that's one of the things I love when I work with you also, because Jen is my physical therapist. One of the things I love about her too is that we spend quite a bit of time in that space of like, let's figure out like how to down regulate the nervous system. Because when we live our whole lives like this, literally, which is what most of the day feels like for many of us, how you can't expect your body to digest. You can't expect it to go to the bathroom correctly. You can't expect it to really know if it's hungry or if it's tired or if it's just, you know, straight up fatigued. The body just doesn't know what it wants unless it's sort of in this like place of relaxation. But we only get to that place if we prioritize that time. So yeah, of course, we talk about it a lot.
Absolutely. And I think it's all about reframing, right? And our bodies are not meant to live at go, 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 go for as long as we typically keep them there, right? A lot of people are pedal to the metal and it they don't look back. They're like, I need to grind. I need to be more, faster, harder, better. And as you said, right, when we are in that sympathetic, that fight or flight upregulation, that's not where we digest. That's not where our gut microbiomes are happy. That's not how our poops look like snakes and we love them, right? We need to swing the other way. And sometimes we have to habit stack. So we have to eat healthy. And then we are also going to do yoga every Wednesday at 8 o'clock. And we're going to go for a walk, maybe two lunchtime hours a week, things that are maintainable to swing us down. And that can be hard. That can be hard, but this book facilitates easy steps. I cannot stress that enough.
Well, I think you bring up a great point about like habit stacking. And I'm sure this is something that you talk about with your patients too. But when we can really pair one habit with another one at the same time, then it makes it easier to do both, right? So if you can't ever remember to take your multivitamin, but you put it next to your toothbrush, the idea is like, I'm brushing my teeth. Oh, I always do that, because who kind of forgets to brush their teeth? Like no one, not unless you're 5 and you're my child. But you brush your teeth and you're like, oh, darn it, this is when I normally take my multivitamin. So then you end up taking it, right? But you can do that same thing with, I really want to relax and like, I want to, I really want to like, listen to my favorite podcast. You can stack that with a walk outside, even though it's cold. I love walking in the winter. I love walking in all seasons, but you can stack those things together. And all at once you're sort of building not only this restorative time where you get to like actually indulge in something you enjoy, like your favorite podcast, but you also move your body at the same time. So I love that idea of like habit stacking. And if I could give everybody in the audience like sort of one take home from tonight, is just sort of figure out like one thing you're already doing that you kind of consistently do, and see if you could just stack one little thing, on top of that would enhance your health as well.
I love that. And I think as another little tidbit to add on to that really lovely train of thought is that it doesn't have to be a lot of time, right? We don't have to carve out 30 minutes. And people are like, oh, I'm going to exercise today. And if they lose a 30-minute window, they don't do anything at all. You can do 10 minutes. You could take a 10-minute walk in the morning and a 15-minute walk in the afternoon. And that is carved out exercise and activity. And you actually got 25 minutes in. It just happened twice in the day. And that's 100% fine. Tiny little motions and movements and changes, they add up.
Oh, 100%. We used to think that you really had to exercise like in that one block of time, but now we know that exercise truly is cumulative. And then it's also not that, as you say, not such a big barrier. There are mornings I remember when my kids were really little, like 2 and 3 years old, when I had to get to work on the early side, and I would get to work and be like, I did the 13-minute workout today. Like literally I had 13 minutes from the time I knew I could be out the door, do a little quick whatever, and then be back in the shower and then on my way to work. And that 13 minutes is better than nothing. And I think one of the things that I just heard recently from my yoga teacher, I do yoga 3 times a week, because it's actually really important to like me regulating my spiritual health. And one of the things that she said recently, I just love this, you'll love this too. She said, there's no losing in mindfulness. You win every time you notice. And I would say for any small health habit, there is no losing. There's no losing by taking a 5-minute walk. You win just because you took that action. And anytime that you spend breathing or meditating, or you put vegetables on your plate first, like there's no losing in any of those situations. You only win. And I think we get into this, very American habit of like black and white thinking, like all or nothing, pedal to the metal or nothing. And I think there are whole shades of gray that exists in there, where a lot of health can happen and doesn't have to feel like so all or nothing or so hard. And that's kind of like, that's where I live my life, in those shades of gray.
I love that. I also feel like I'm in the shades of gray. And truthfully, with habit stacking, like I journal and I have tea. So like that's my habit stacking that I do every single night. And every year I choose a word. And this year is all about boundaries. And I feel I can choose boundaries, but it's boundaries about the things about my health. And if I can recommend anything, is that carve out the boundaries for the walk, carve out the boundaries to read a chapter of Dr. Katie's book, or make another new recipe, or do something that's going to benefit you, but you're putting the boundaries to protect yourself in the bubble so you can actually achieve whatever it is that you're looking to achieve.
I love that. That could be my 2023 word. My 2022 word is intention,
Oh,
um, which is a fun one. Sort of, I guess there's many different ways to interpret intention, but that's my 2022 word. Though next year I may go back to one from a few years ago, which is fun. I think we all just need to have more fun for
great.
sure.
I don't mean to interrupt. You guys have had such a wonderful conversation about, I love the habit stacking idea. And I have a question about diaries. Dr. Jennifer Morgan, you talked about journaling. Is that a diary, a food diary, exercise diary? What kind of journaling is that?
So my journals have shifted depending on what I'm working on in my life. So I have some of my patients journal like their bladder and bowel health habits, because sometimes we're working on optimizing diminishing urgency, or working on like optimizing their stool consistency, making sure that we're not constipated or not having like looser stools. My journal right now is all about mindfulness. So I take about 10 minutes every night and I write down 10 things that I'm grateful for that happened in the day. And it's just to be able to take these moments that I can like peel them out of what feels maybe like a chaotic day, and I can just kind of track how many good things actually are happening, so I don't miss those moments, just to kind of increase my own happiness barometer, if you will, and just enjoy each day.
And that's something also you can start to build your routine out of the diary or the journaling. It's sort of giving the intention of your day, and those routines just become part of it. I want to now open this up to the audience if they have questions. Is that okay? I mean, do you have more that you want to talk about, the two of you, or? Okay, I just want to give the
we could
audience.
talk for forever. So I think let's give it to the audience, and we'll I'm sure we'll keep going as we go.
Okay, well, let me go into the chat. Some people could do the chat, other people do the Q&A. So let me just go through the chat first and see. I think maybe you touched upon this. What do you recommend for people who are allergic to nuts, beans, and eggs?
Well, first of all, my sympathy, because those are like three of my favorite food groups. You know, eggs are actually pretty easy to get around. As far as like in baking, one of my favorite egg substitutes would be just what's called a flax egg, where you take a tablespoon of ground flaxseed and you mix it with 3 tablespoons of water, and then just let it sit for like 10 or 15 minutes, and it can congeals, and it has the consistency and the binding ability of eggs. So we'll do that often if we're making like meatballs. We often make like tofu meatballs. We'll use like a flax egg and a whole grain in addition to like a bunch of spices and some crumbled tofu, and like that will bind it together. As far as like an allergy to nuts, I would say go for the seeds if you can tolerate them. So your sunflower, your hemp seeds, you know, chia seeds, all those pack a ton of protein, a ton of fiber. That's actually why I love like nuts and seeds so much, is if you had to pick like a perfect food that was a perfect combination of fiber, fat, and protein, it would be, you know, a little handful of nuts. But seeds will do the same thing. And if you're one is allergic to beans also, then maybe you can pull into other proteins like lentils. And if those are sensitive also, then maybe you're a person who actually has to have a little bit more animal protein just to make sure that you're getting all of the stuff that you need. But I would say also to really talk to an allergist and figure out if you really are allergic versus just sensitive, because there is like a little bit of a difference there.
Okay. Can you comment on plant-forward eating relative to managing weight for postmenopausal women, i.e. the muffin top belly? Also interested in your thoughts on hormonal effects on inability to lose weight. Just that.
Yeah, this is a tough thing. You know, most of us, when we go through like the hormonal transition of perimenopause, like we've never been in this space before. If you know, if you're a woman kind of going through this space and you've had, you know, kids, been pregnant or breastfed, like, you know, that there are ups and downs, but there's really no sort of preparing for what happens like in the midlife. And it's a totally new set of circumstances, totally new levels of hormone. it's new challenges in your life. You know, your family, your kids might be going to college, your parents might be getting older and you're having to take care of them. You may be in a career and sort of like trying to figure out like, what's my next step? Is this really what I want to be doing for the next 10 to 15 or 20 years of my life? Like there's a lot of changes that come with the midlife. And so it's kind of like all these things kind of happen all at once. And a lot of women aren't really prepared for that. And so what happens then is the body's just sort of trying to like find equilibrium. It's just trying to figure it out. And because we lose the protective effects of many of our hormones like estrogen, progesterone, et cetera, we end up sort of in a space where it's easier to gain weight. And the metabolism in our, once we're, you know, sort of post-menopause, our metabolism's like 40 to 60% of what it was when we were like 20 years old, which is why your, you know, kiddos can eat a ton of food and you can barely have anything on your plate and feel like you gain weight. And what women sort of figure out is that what has always worked for you doesn't seem to work in this stage of life. So a lot of us are used to things like caloric restriction or, you know, decreasing calories and then just increasing exercise. But what I've also figured out through this time period, you know, in my own life of really delving into plant-forward diet, is that calories in don't necessarily equal calories out. And it's not about the quantity of food that we eat, but about the quality. And much of that we're still kind of figuring out in science, but a lot of it actually has to do with our microbiome. So if you ate, for example, like a handful of almonds, and that was like, say, 150 calories, you actually don't absorb all 150 calories. Your microbiome eats some of the fiber that you're sort of, you know, that you have in those almonds. And so you might only absorb 130 or 120 of those calories. Where if you ate 150 calories of Skittles, like your microbiome would be like, I don't want any of this stuff. And it would give you all 150 calories. So, and then you get, of course, with sugar, you would get the big hormonal ups and downs with insulin and glucose. So it's a big game of trying to figure out like what's going to work for you in this stage of life. I will also say that for many people going through the midlife, that what we call like intermittent fasting or time restricted eating sometimes can work for people. Sometimes having a little bit more protein or a little more fat can sometimes work for people. It really just depends so much on your own constitution. But I would say that'd be a great thing to work with a health coach, an integrative medicine doctor, or someone who's in this space, because sometimes there could be some like little idiosyncrasies there that need to be worked through.
And I think what you're saying is that seriously, everyone really should take some time to see how their body is reacting to certain things. It's not, there's never a magic exercise. There's not a magic source of kind of diet. It's really to take the time to just watch yourself, to watch how you react to things.
Laura, like that is such a crucial point. You know, we all want the silver bullet. We want the magic pill. Like we just want to sort of do something and like for it to work. But it's not quite so cut and dry.
So another question is, do you recommend using charcoal to help detox? And if so, what are your recommendations on taking it?
You know, that's a good question. I don't really recommend on the regular for people to take supplements to help their body detox. We actually do a really good job detoxifying our bodies on a regular basis with our stool, with our urine, with our sweat, and our lymphatic system. But the problem is our body can only do that good work of detoxification when it's in the rest and digest, relax stage, mostly when we're sleeping at night. And how many of us shortchange our sleep? Like literally everybody, right? We're just not giving our bodies like that space. So I would say if you're working with a physician or someone who knows about how to use charcoal, how to use other supplements, it could be helpful for you. But it's not something that I would recommend, like just sort of a blanket yes. Yeah.
Okay. So in your practices, both of you, Dr. Katie and Dr. Morgan, do you treat men equally to women, or is it more women, or is it more men in your practices?
You know, I see more women because I think, that's just like the patient population that sort of seeks out my care. But I do love working with guys. I really do. They always have a fresh perspective, and I enjoy the interactions with all of my patients. So I see everybody, and like I said, I see all the way from babies all the way to older adults. So I kind of see everybody, but the majority of my practice tends to be sort of in the like 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s women.
Dr. Morgan, how about you?
As for me, I find that right now a majority of my practice is also women, but at least in the pelvic health physical therapy space, I find that physicians who treat mostly men, so urology in particular is what comes to mind, they did not really know that someone could do this type of work until I've met with most of them, especially within like the Stamford, New Canaan, Darien, Norwalk area. It's a very interesting space to be in. And so with that, I actually am one of the only physical therapists, like pelvic health specialists in the area that does treat men, because outside of that doctorate education, we have to then continue like a residency program, and it takes specialty training. We go like a male pathway and a female pathway, and I've done both. So I treat both, and I'm one of the only people who treats both from pediatrics into adulthood as well.
Another question is what, I guess for both of you, what do you think about Michael Pollan's advice? Eat food, mostly plants, not too much.
I think it's genius. I'm a big one for like quotable things like that, and I actually quote it in the book. I think it's genius, and I think a lot of what he's put out has been really helpful in starting the conversation for people about how to live a more plant forward life. And I really commend the people, the forward thinkers in, in this day and age, who even 15, 20 years ago, when this wasn't such a popular way to lead life, we're just starting to have these conversations, because, it's in just sort of thinking about this tonight, and maybe you watch a documentary on something tomorrow, and then you're talking to your neighbor a couple of days later. It's like, that's when like the needle, it starts to move, right? And you start to make real change. But I'm a big fan of all these thought leaders.
So tea. I know the question is, I know green tea and matcha are good for you. What if you can't tolerate caffeine?
So it doesn't actually matter if your tea is caffeinated or not. You can still get the benefits from it. So one of the studies that I quote in the book that I really just love is this idea that, I always say green tea is like one of the most anti-inflammatory things on the face of the planet. But when they have studied green tea specifically in women, and we're doing things like looking at like the thickness of the carotid intima, which is like how much space we actually have for blood to flow through an artery. And they were looking at women who'd had a couple of cups of tea a day, 3 or more. It was a lot of tea. It didn't matter if it was decaf or regular. It just mattered that those women who had the habit of having several cups of green tea a day had better flow through their carotid arteries, which would be prevention of stroke, right? So, I mean, I think that, I think if you can't tolerate the caffeine, then just buy decaf and know you're still getting all the catechins. You're still getting the biggest one, which is called ECGC. You're still getting the flavanols, like all the important stuff. And if you can't tolerate caffeine, you can make your own decaf tea so easily. So all you do is like steep your cup of tea, and then steep it for about a minute, because caffeine's the first thing to come out of the tea bag. Ditch the water, get another cup of hot water, and then continue the steep. And you get rid of actually most of the caffeine. So if you didn't have access to decaf tea, you could make your own.
And are you saying both black tea and green tea is good for this, the carotid?
Oh, for the carotid.
Yeah.
That specific study was done with green tea, but we know that black tea is also really helpful for the body. It's maybe not just as helpful as green tea is. If I was going to make, one sort of universal recommendation to people, it would be really to consider green tea in your life. And as with many things that I like now, like I really like tempeh, I really like green tea, I really like tahini, and I like mushrooms. I like all these different things. The first time I had these foods, I didn't like them very much. When I first
Mhm.
had green tea in college, I went to a Japanese restaurant with my lovely husband, like as a date. I was like, this green tea is terrible. And he thought it was delicious because he was so used to this toasted rice green tea. And now I literally love it. But it took me a long time for my taste buds to adjust. So if you don't love something the first time you try it, you kind of have to take the little kid mentality and you got to try it like 10 times before you can totally say like, all right, I've given this 10 shots, like I really don't like this food, because our taste buds just kind of need some time, and sometimes it's a texture thing too.
Mm. Can you talk about kombu? I've never seen this word before. Kombucha, maybe, or maybe it's just kombu, and how it might make eating beans easier.
Oh my gosh, I love kombu. So I didn't know what kombu was until again, it's my Japanese mother-in-law. She teaches me so much. But kombu is a seaweed, and what it does is when put with beans and other things that are hard to digest, it helps to break down the phytic acid. So if you have an issue eating beans because they make you super bloated and gassy, if you cook your beans with a little bit of kombu, and you don't need much, you buy it dried, like you can find it at Whole Foods or at like an Asian grocery store. You can take like an inch or so of this stuff and throw it in your pot of beans, and it helps decrease some of those raffinose sugars that are really hard, like that make things really hard to digest. And so with the kombu, I have found a shortcut actually in a product that's called Eden Organic, and it's a canned bean that's pressure cooked with kombu before it's put in the can of beans.
Yeah.
So when the pandemic hit and we were stocking our little pantry of, stuff, getting like a big case of beans from Amazon worked out really great for us. And so I highly recommend buying that brand if you don't want to go through the hassle of pressure cooking and making your own beans on the stovetop.
Yeah. So another question, I am a breast cancer survivor and have been recommended to follow a vegan diet, which I've been doing for the past 2 years. However, I don't feel great about this diet and have been gaining weight recently. I love that I am eating more vegetables than I used to, but would like to introduce limited amounts of high quality animal protein as well. Do you agree that meat should be avoided for cancer patients?
Again, I come back to this place of like, I don't take anything completely off the table. Maybe the only thing I'd take off the table 100% of the time is soda, because there's really nothing redeeming about soda whatsoever. And I would maybe be the second thing I might say is like sweeteners that don't have calories. I don't trust them. We know there's no such thing as a free lunch, and I just don't believe in those. But I would say if one has the inclination to eat a small amount of animal protein and it's well sourced, around these parts, you can get really well sourced animal protein. If you know where it's coming from and you know how the animal is cared for and it's organic and it was free range and grass finished and like all the things,
Mm.
then having a small amount of that, even if you have a history of breast cancer, in my opinion, would not be the worst thing in the whole world. It might actually be a better thing than gaining weight, which inherently increases your estrogen production, which inherently feeds breast cancer. So that might be a better choice, but it'd be probably something that needs to be weighed with a lot of other considerations. But that's my feeling, just kind of with that small amount of information.
Okay. So the last question I have is actually not based on any kind of food question. It's from a woman, Lisa Shepard. Where did you go, Dr. Katie from Integrated Health at Tully? Miss you.
Oh, so Lisa Shepard's a lovely dietitian that I know from the hospital. She's a good soul. I am still at the Tully temporarily, working for the Center of Integrative Medicine. But one of the exciting adventures of my spring is that I'm going to leave and start a private practice. I need to find my own sense of balance in my life, and so that's what's led me. Even though I really love working at the Tully Center, I'm excited for this next phase of life. And really, it's just about me having time with my kids and doing all the fun stuff that, that they want to do, as well as obviously continue to work with patients. I don't think I would ever get to a point in my life where I wasn't working with patients, because it really brings me so much joy. Like, I can't even tell you how many times a day I have this moment where I'm like, I can't believe I get to do this. Like, I can't believe this is my job. Like, I live that every day. And so, but don't worry, I'm not going to be far away, and I'm going to be subleasing some space in New Canaan, which I'm really excited about. So you'll see a lot of me.
I see that it's 8 o'clock, so I really want to thank the two of you for coming tonight to talk about this amazing book. It was lovely to hear you guys talk about the importance of taking care of our bodies, to just slow down just a little bit, listen to it, give it a little bit more tender, loving care. I have been noticing on the chat that a lot of links to your Instagram account, to a number of things about Dr. Katie. If you do see the chat and you want to save any of these links, you can go right over to your chat. There's these three little dots over on the right. If you click on those 3 dots, you will see a little thing saying save the chat, and you can just click on that and it will go into your documents folder. And later on, you can open up your folder and you can find all the information right in there, all the links. And so you can continue your conversation with Dr. Katie. Jennifer Morgan, thank you so much for being with us. Wonderful moderating. And Dr. Katie, again, thank you again for a beautiful book and a lot of excitement. Oh, wait, we have 3 more messages. They just all of a sudden, nobody wants you to go. Wait 1 second. Let me go down to the bottom. Oh, thank you. Thank you. That was excellent. Good advice. Clinical. Oh, yes.
And it looks like there's a request. There's a request for more copies of the book at your library. I didn't plant that person.
We will. You know what? If you start putting holds, we have a ratio: 4 holds, 1 book, 4 holds, 1 book. So you just keep throwing the holds on there. We just keep buying the books. Just a little library trick.
Very cool. Neat.
But also the books are at Elm Street Books. If you want to get a book, Elm Street Books also has copies of it. I know they sold out of the first batch and they've just gotten more. So thank you both again. Thank you very much. Everyone, thank you for coming tonight. We have more programming. Keep an eye on New Canaan Library, our events page. We have lots of things coming up. Good night, everyone.